You're listening to the Venue RX podcast, where we provide your weekly prescription of tips, tools, tactics, and inspiration to start or grow your wedding and events business. Follow along with our listeners as we delve into the exciting world of events. And make sure you check out our YouTube channel and social pages, where you can engage with our show host and guests. No matter if you're brand new to the business of weddings or an event pro, our mix of mindset and mechanics will challenge and inspire you. And now, without further ado, our host, Jonathan Aymin.
What is going on, everyone? My name is Jonathan. I am one of the hosts here, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Wirick from Kansas City, all the way from Kansas. Super pumped.
Snow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cold. Oh, you had snow. All right.
I got a couple inches of snow yesterday.
Well, I am absolutely pumped. There's no snow here. I'm in Southern California, but we are joined by another Southern California resident, Noah Sargent. Am I saying that right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
Amazing. Welcome to the show, Noah. Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you so much for being here and being willing to be our first guest.
Exciting. Yeah.
So I want to introduce you a little bit before we dive into your story a little bit. I was first exposed to you at one of the venues that I run. We were doing a wedding and the client had hired you to do a live stream. And folks, you know, if you're listening to this, I highly encourage you to check out the YouTube and of course, subscribe to our channel because that's the natural thing to do. So you can see all the amazing episodes we have. But you have to check out Noah's work. I mean, Corporate Streams, the company that he has created, and the level of expertise that I saw deployed at that wedding in both videography and live streaming was truly incredible. And we've tried to do some virtual things at this venue, and we've been challenged with the internet signal, but the team that Noah brought in, I can't wait to unpack it with you. And I know there's so many people out there that are wondering about this whole virtual world. So Noah, take it away. Tell us a little bit about who you are, maybe introduce yourself, your company, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Yeah.
Oh man, thanks. That's a great intro and I really appreciate the kind words there. Yeah, so Corporate Streams is a specialty live streaming company. We're based in Southern California and we've been streaming before COVID-19 hit, before it was really popular, right? And so traditionally it was called webcasting, and corporate meetings would basically have their leads, their supervisors, the CEOs, whomever, right? They want to address their team, but they don't necessarily have the ability to bring everybody into one spot, right? And so we would do webcasts or virtual meetings, and there are some large companies that do that on a regular basis. So I have the good fortune of working alongside with some of those companies, and I realized that in Southern California, that niche wasn't quite met completely. And so I'm still kind of the go-to guy for a couple of those larger streaming companies, but I realized I wanted to be a self-starter and create my own business. And so the last 2 years or so have been really just me growing and learning and trying to step from a blue-collar mindset more to the white-collar mindset, if you can handle that analogy. But yeah, it's been an exciting ride. I've been shooting and had cameras in my hands for over 15 years now. And I look like a young pup, but I just turned 30 a couple days ago. So yeah, I get that all the time, that my Achilles heel or whatever you want to call it of, oh, you look like you're 22. It's like, no, actually I've been doing this a long time. So,
well, you're in good company. Tim over here, I think we're in birth order here. I'm actually turning 31 in 2 days, 31.
Wow. Happy birthday. Happy belated.
Thank you. And if I shave, I also look like I'm about 17 and a half. So I try to keep the beard going strong so people take me seriously.
Yeah. It's one of those weird things where I think at our age, roughly in this ballpark, you have enough experience that you can be useful, but not too much experience that you're burnt out and you don't want to do anything else and you're set in your ways and all that too. So,
yep.
Yeah.
That's valid. So can I dive right in?
Yeah.
I've already got like a million questions. And so I don't know you as well, Noah. I haven't had the chance to work with you, but Jonathan has had amazing things to say. And so when he suggested asking you to come on, I was like, hell yeah, let's do this. That'd be awesome. Especially with the world that's kind of revolving around us right now. First of all, just for our audience, and because I'm relatively new to it as well, can you give us a short description of what live streaming is so that our audience really kind of understands?
Absolutely. Yeah. So live streaming is taking some sort of video signal and putting it online on the web so that your audience can view that. So it's a lot like broadcast television, where somebody could tune into that specific channel per se, right? And so it can be a little bit more complicated than that. That's simpler terms, but essentially we're broadcasting and we're broadcasters. And so that's kind of the crossover too, if you look at traditional media and the gear and the things, the technology that have been used. And so that can be very intimidating, but the crazy thing about today is there are a lot of really great tools that aren't as expensive as they used to be. And so you can kind of build your own kit per se on the lower end stuff. And then what we hope to do, or what we aim to do, is kind of fill in on those higher end or bigger budget weddings, because we tend to bring a whole crew, a whole team together. Right. And that was something Jonathan and I were talking about a bit of, what could that look like for his particular venues. And he had a couple concepts and ideas around that. So that can get a little bit more technical, but yeah, to going back to what is live streaming, that's basically it. And you can set permissions essentially. So if you only want friends and family, or if you want to do specific invites, or even do a passcode, you could really restrict who sees that broadcast essentially.
I want to jump in here really quick and ask, so when you think about live streaming, I know there's a huge segment of the population that has enjoyed either viewing or actually creating their own streams on Twitch from, the gaming side of things. And I know the gaming and kind of esports world, that's been something that's definitely been on the rise. Do you see a substantial difference between that style of live stream? Because isn't that live streaming as well?
Sure. Yeah, it is definitely. And Twitch is one of the largest platforms for live streaming today. It is a little different. It's kind of like baseball versus basketball, right? It's a sport, but it's just different. And so with video game streaming, it's typically a full screen of your game, and then in the corner you'll have what's called a picture-in-picture, which is kind of like this setup here. I just happen to have that ready to go.
The demo, he's ready.
Somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So obviously in that corner, you would see the gamer essentially in their face and them playing. And so the game is center screen to that. But yeah, so in that case, it is similar. I found with Twitch streaming and game streaming as a whole, there tends to be a lot more graphic intensive stuff. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine a few days ago about this, and like what the difference between modern streaming is versus like traditional broadcasting. One of the things that stands out to me is the thought of, if you look at traditional television, they don't use as many bumps and sizzles and moves. I mean, they kind of do now with ESPN and certain replays and stuff. But traditionally, when you're cutting between cameras, you're just hitting the button, right? But as you get more advanced, you could start to do different kind of movements and different kind of weird things to amp up the transitions and the movements. When I went to film school 10 years ago now, that was kind of a thing that our professors would harp on us and say, you could use these effects, but don't overdo it. The simpler, the better. And I'm still kind of in that traditional broadcast mindset. Mm-hmm. But depending on your demographic and your target audience, the media and the execution is going to change slightly. And so as far as Twitch streaming goes, I think that would be one of the things that stands out between the differences. And also there's a level of quality that I think can be shifted. When you're talking about multicam setup, and multiple cameras, that can get expensive really quick. And so some streamers have awesome setups too, but I would say the majority of those who stream video games, their setups are like sub $2,000 level kind of equipment, and that's acceptable a lot of places. But I guess I love analogies. And so for me, it's like you can have a car that gets you from A to B, right? Or you can have the thing with all the bells and whistles, the Tesla, the newest technology, whatever you want to, fill in the blank there. But now I'm off in the tangent here. So all right. Bring me back home with another question.
Tesla.
Yeah.
Elon, sponsor us. No. So that's awesome. And I think what I'd like to do is kind of take everything you just said and pull it back down to the ground level for our listeners and understand how could they incorporate this. I mean, obviously, we're talking multiple camera setups. You need, number one, do you need a specialist? How many cameras would you recommend? What are kind of the requirements for, if somebody's like, hey, this is an awesome idea. I love the idea of live streaming. I want to go out and do this tomorrow. What kind of investment and strategy, like how would you,
well,
John,
Tim, Well, yeah, I was going to say, before we even get started on that, I think we really need to understand, our listeners need to understand, is live streaming even important? I mean, for the average venue owner right now, is that something that you should sink? And Noah, you just said possibly thousands of dollars into camera gear or developing a relationship with a company like Corporate Streams who can come in and do this. But still, you're bringing $120,000 plus of gear in that setup. I mean, that's a huge expense. You've got to think about Wi-Fi. You got to think about your Ethernet. You got to think about all these different things that go into it. Is this even like, why should a private venue owner, right? Or even someone who provides services for a wedding, for any of these elopements or anything that's happening, is this something that even is relevant? Should people be considering this?
Oh yeah, that's such a huge question. And I'm sure venues, are considering that question significantly now. I'll backtrack and tell a little bit. So before COVID hit, probably about a year ago, I was on a path and I just called about 50 different venues in Orange County. And I asked, and I was explaining what I did. And I would say more than 50% of them are like, nobody live streams weddings. Like, why would you want to do this? You know, like, and those that did understand it, they're like, no, that's going to be too expensive, or that's going to be too hard, or that's just not what we do. And that was the takeaway for me, is that's not what we do. And I think we could easily fall into, this is what we've done in the past. This is what has been successful. And so this is what we're sticking to. But I think COVID has really forced the wedding industry, and really the event industry as a whole, to really reconsider that question, and to really look at live streaming differently, whether we like to do that or not. And obviously, my company and what I'm doing is trying to be the answer to that question a lot of the times. But the realization and the honest answer for me is that I would say more than 50% of the weddings don't have to have my services. Okay. You know, and that's kind of weird to say and weird to admit, but the reality is, I would say like I said, the majority of those weddings can be handled in-house by the venue. And what it comes down to is having the right attitude and spending a little bit of time, getting a little bit of effort. But ultimately, it's an investment. And so the hope and the thought would be you could set up your system, your kit, whatever, what have you, so that you can make a return on that investment, whether that's, charging an upcharge for those streaming services, or if you really look at it, say we fast forward 5 years and, live streaming is done at the majority of the weddings, you could have been competing with other venues, and like the brides and grooms who are looking around, and they look at yours and you say, oh, actually, that's not something we offer. Whereas like they might go to another venue basically because you don't have that service and you didn't think through that and didn't consider that. And so I don't mean to be a fear monger, but that's something that would go on in my mind as far as live streaming goes, and how to get that set up. So it can be very important. But what it comes down to for me is consider the bride and groom and consider their perspective, right? So they have, the bride and groom, or brides and grooms, have families, family members and friends. And even in my wedding that was before COVID, there was a significant percentage that couldn't make the wedding, whether they were working or, couldn't fly or didn't have the funds to really do that.
And I think both Tim and I have seen that absolutely in the venues, just the guest counts. It naturally, you invite 200 and 150 or 60 or 70 show up. So yeah. And so that's a huge deal, that there are loved ones and there are people that can't make that wedding. And so live streaming can be a good answer for a lot of those friends and family, and to extend the joyous celebration is a huge deal. And there's just something to being live that's different than watching the video, right? Oh, yeah. Watching it back a few months later, 6 months later, like there's a different energy that's there with live. And that's what excites me about doing what I do, is because we only have one chance to get it right.
Yeah. No pressure, right? As a photographer, you know that too, is like, if you miss the moment, it's gone, and you'll never have a happy bride if you miss that flower toss or something. So absolutely. I think you hit it perfectly. And venues should consider doing something like this, because number one, it could be a competitive advantage. And obviously with COVID, and the limitations and the restrictions on even guest count, if you can't invite 150 people, you're at this, conundrum. Like, do I lower my guest count to 50 people and only have it very exclusive, and then I have to discount those extra 100 people? You kind of open up the gamut to like, yeah, we can accommodate 200 people, but we're restricted. And COVID, in my opinion, is just the first round of what's going to happen over these next 10, 20, 30 years. It's likely going to have something happen again. And not to be again fear mongering, but nobody thought this would happen, and it did. So the chances of happening again are likely, and who knows our answer. Moving forward, if this restriction were to happen again, or not even get lifted as soon as everybody hopes, you're increasing the opportunity for your clients to book your space. And it's like, okay, yeah, we only have 25 people, but we can live stream it. And we have this opportunity where you can share it with all 300 of your guests, and they would understand. It also opens up the opportunity for people to consider you as a destination where, when our venues where it's like, well, I can't get married in San Diego because I'm from Ohio and I have to get married in Ohio. Well, no, you can actually get married in San Diego now. We can live stream your event. And that way grandma doesn't have to travel from Ohio. And so you said that literally, and I think that's a huge proponent of why venues should consider this. And I remember seeing it the first time, I think it was like 8 or 9 years ago when I was photographing a wedding, and it was just a laptop. It was laptop set up on the front chair, and it wasn't high quality or anything, but it was in demand, and that afforded the couple the opportunity to get married at a different location. And so I think there's a lot of pluses to consider for it. Ultimately, I'm just wondering if it makes sense from the investment side. And so my question now is, do you think it's worth, I guess for you, is it setting up the system for the venue to own and operate, or is it setting up them with your phone number to say, hey, Noah, come produce this at our venue? What do you think? Sure. There's options in both realms? And I mean, obviously, I don't know what business approach you have or your model in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been thinking about this a little bit with my conversations with Jonathan. I think what it comes down to is you got to serve your clients first, right? And so in this particular case, your audience, from my understanding, is a lot of venue owners and a lot of people who already have facilities. And so I want to address my thoughts around that kind of person first. And so if you're a venue, you got to ask yourself, has there ever been a time where somebody turned down or didn't book your venue because of the size? Maybe they were too large or too small, right? And so maybe you have a space where they needed 300 people and you can only do 200, right? So imagine right there that you no longer have a size limitation, right? Because those extra 100 people can be virtual, right? So you can accommodate in that way. And then going back to what Tim said about COVID restrictions, you might have to be at 25% capacity, or I don't know, you guys would probably know better than I, but there's going to be those number of restrictions. Yeah. So there's going to be those as well. So imagine having a smaller wedding, a more concentrated wedding, but still online, that the audience is extended and reached to more people in that sense. So as far as the venue goes, I think there's kind of two approaches that I would take. One would be to try to set up some sort of minimum like base kit for your venue. And so we could talk about that and look at that a little bit deeper.
I love that.
And so that base kit could be, it's up to you whether you want to charge an upcharge of $500, $1,000, $1,500 for that kit. So that could be something that's just part of your package, right? It's part of your space, so that your bride and groom know that that's available. And then where I think I could fit in, or where that complements everything, is the thought of when you have that wedding that's willing to spend the money, that has the budget, that wants excellence. They don't want just the minimum. That I think that's where Corporate Streams comes in, and that's where I come into. Totally. One of the things from a professional standpoint that has always frustrated me in the business world, professionally with corporate clients, whatever, there's this good enough attitude sometimes with audiovisual technicians and just people in general, and that's really kind of set a bad taste in my mouth. And so if you know anything about me, I like to go above and beyond. I want to do the very best, and I'm going to throw everything I can at it to give it the best thing I can give. And so that, in some ways, puts me in a niche or a corner, but at the same time, it's actually really, really good, because I'm not starving to do 1,000 little projects. I would rather do 5 or 6 big projects and give it my all, essentially. So I think that's how I would fit in with venues, but I'm not worried about selling my pitch right now necessarily in this interview. I think it would be more important to give your audience and even talk to you guys about like what a setup would look like and what minimum things you would want to incorporate for that too.
So way to take away my next question. I really appreciate that. No, Jonathan, you had something.
Yeah. So I had two different things. So, well, Noah, first, the level of excellence that you brought. I mean, I said this at the beginning. Tim, we're going to have to put on our Instagram, not just a picture, because, we'll do a little bit of a preview of this episode on our Instagram. But I took some pictures of your setup, just, like behind the scenes from the venue kind of perspective, looking forward. And the production quality, the level of just excellence really is what it was that you put out there. I mean, you definitely over-delivered 10 times in the amount of gear that you brought. I think you had 8 different camera angles, even just with the link that you sent me, with the attention to detail, and it was like a touch. I mean, I really feel like it was a really, really masterful touch, how you clicked between the different camera angles. I mean, it's clear that you've done this before. It's not just amateur hour switching between 2 different webcams. You're bringing that to the table, and that was really incredible to see. So, yeah, I think sure, we're talking about, adding value to venues out there, but I think you are a really good place to start for anyone who's looking to even virtually enable their space, or as that resource for people, especially in the Southern California area, who need that level of excellence for the clients they put in. But no, I wanted to ask you, and that was just, boosting you a little bit, but I wanted to ask, when looking at a live stream setup, do you think, and I want to kind of get like a final answer on this, do you think that all spaces should be virtually enabled? Not so much having cameras, not so much having, the gear, but just, do you think venue owners should actually think about a setup like yours coming into their space? Because it's that level of intentionality that I guess the venue owner would have to have when thinking about, okay, we could have cameras here, we could have stuff going on, and think about that as they're thinking about their space.
That's a great question. I think it comes down to, do I, as the venue owner, want to have as many options for my clients as possible? And I think having that option to live stream is one of those things. And so if you look at your venue, maybe you have a green room, maybe you don't. Maybe you have a separate reception area from the ceremony area, maybe you don't. So it's kind of one of those things of, am I looking and really considering all my options and making sure that I have everything that I could for my clients. And so as far as live streaming goes, it would be that same question. And I could say, oh yeah, everybody needs one, and that's the end of it, right? That would be the easy answer. But I think the reality is not every venue necessarily would need that. And they would know their clients better than I. But I guess having the mindset of, is this an extra feature? Is this something that I could offer? And then from a financial standpoint, is this something that I could also upsell to the client? I mean, those are all things to consider.
Well, and not to interrupt you either, but Tim and I just got done in episode 3 talking about different ways to increase revenue at your space. And, just like Tim said, again, not to be a fearmonger, but this may, similar scenarios like the one that we're in right now with COVID may happen. How do you find ways to diversify the revenue that's coming into your spot, and maybe having a space that you can convert to doing other different types of events that are not just weddings, but have a virtual component to them, production component, because many venues are very beautiful. That's definitely an avenue that people could go down. But anyway, Tim, I want to go back to you. You were about to.
No, back to your question. What would you consider a base package that a venue could consider? And I mean,
great question.
Obviously, the requirements of what would go into that package, because I have a nice camera, but if I don't have the Wi-Fi, so if you don't mind, helping us out there.
For sure, yeah. So, I'm actually writing a series right now, and there's about a dozen different steps within live streaming, and so. I should probably pull up a list so I don't misquote it, but essentially the first step is the camera, right? So obviously we need some sort of video system to complement. And so I don't know about you, but I've seen the phone in the back of the room, and that might work for some people, but your venue, you want to elevate what you're producing and what you're putting on. So I would recommend at least a 2 camera setup. One would be a wider shot, right, of the whole stage or the whole place to establish positioning. And then the second one would be a much closer shot of the bride and groom. That does a few things. One, it gives you the option to cut in and out, right? And so it makes it more lively and more interesting. But two, you can show a different level of detail than you can with just one camera in the back of the room. But also tends to be kind of stale when it comes to video. I think with today's day and age, I would be baffled if you turn on the television or you turn on a YouTube video or any sort of media where they don't cut at least 10, 15 times a minute, you know? And there are some incredible shows and incredible movies that have the one take shots, and those are really beautiful if you want to go down a rabbit hole and check those out. But the majority of the media today has that syncopation to it and a faster tone. So starting with cameras, I would say minimum of 2.
Now,
I would also
just half step back. Are you talking SLRs? Are you talking just regular point and shoots? Like,
sure.
Are we talking thousands of dollars for the camera?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say DSLRs are acceptable at that level, or mirrorless cameras. And so the thing to look at is the lens choices. And so if you go with a prime, there's 2 different types of lenses. Let me back up there.
Yeah,
so there's primes.
Way down a deep rabbit hole here, I have a feeling. So.
Yeah.
And then we're a gear review. Let's do a gear review. We were just talking.
Yeah. I'll try not to get too much in the weeds, but yeah, essentially
Sony, Nikon. What?
Yeah. Oh man. We just created 10 more hours. You guys ready for 10 hours of content? No.
We need to be live streaming this on Twitch, and then we can get people there.
There we go. There we go. Yeah. So anyways, the series that I'm working on will basically dive in deeper about all of those different elements, and it's going to be completely free. So you can check that out on my YouTube channel or on my website, which I'll link to it. We'll have the written articles and then the videos as well. So it'll talk about those different kind of aspects of each level. So instead of trying to go in deeper actually on camera, I'll skip over that and we'll keep going here. So
there you go. Hey, we can put the link to that in our description of the YouTube channel. So again, if you're listening and you're driving, don't just keep driving, keep listening, but go back, look at the description and check us out on YouTube, because we'll put links to everything Noah's talking about. It's going to be powerful and you're not going to want to miss it. Anyway, keep going.
What about like a ballpark from price point? Like, do you think you could say, for $2,000, $3,000, the cameras, you could be kind of in that price range? I mean, because as a venue owner, it was very important to me, obviously your costs, and you're at the very beginning, we kind of talked, $120,000 setup. Well, that's like a year's worth of rent at some locations. So is it, do you think we can get away with, and I know cameras too, as a photographer, just like a little 60D Canon with a 24 to 70 lens or something like that. And because cameras, like you said, you can start at the very base and you can go all the way up to the hundreds of $1,000s, for a red camera, that sort of thing. So
I would say, ballpark per camera, you're looking at 700 to 1,000 per camera, brand new. I'm actually a big fan of used equipment if you know what you're looking for and you can strategize well around that. And so there's cameras itself, but there's several other things to consider too. Yep. So the camera is just one out of those many. So I would say a healthy budget would be $2,000 to $3,000 to get set up. And then if you really got to look at it of like how many clients do I have to book to make that worth it? Like what's your profit margin and, what's your upsell for that? Like for the film world, I don't know about for the venue spaces, but for the film world, for me to purchase a new piece of gear, it has to pay itself off within a year of rentals and that kind of thing. So I don't know how that works for y'all, but I would assume, especially because we know COVID's probably not gonna die within the next year, like there's probably going to be residuals of that over time. So I would be surprised if you put $2,000 or $3,000 into gear and that not pay itself off within a year's time. So,
totally. Well, and even so, for any of the venue owners out here listening, this is an incredible time to figure this out, because not only may you not be able to have your typical schedule of weddings or tours going on, but this could be a great time to educate yourself on some of this stuff, and so that you could be offering virtual tours, because that might be something where you have someone who's coming in from out of town who might want to do a smaller wedding, one of these micro weddings or something like that with a limited guest count. They're thinking about, doing this, but maybe they have their fiancés overseas, or, maybe they're not there at the space. So figuring your gear out now and then using it to actually help you book and sell more might be a really, really good strategy in the next couple months, even as we're still kind of in this period of figuring out are we open? Are we closed? At least that's kind of what the
well, and if
current.
You have vendor friends, obviously if you have a vendor list and those photographers, those are great resources for you to talk to, and they may have extra cameras that they'd be willing to sell. So there's all sorts of ways that you can go there. So
cool.
Sorry, I know we're going to beat the hell out of that issue right there, but
no worries. Yeah. So there's workflow. That's one of the topics I'll cover. So essentially it's knowing where your audio is coming through, your video is coming through, and then how that's going through your system, the workflow through your system to get to the audience. And so you have to have all the steps there to, broadcast or for your audience to see the stream, right? Depending on your venue, you may already have this, but there's lighting to consider too. Not every situation is set up well for lighting. And that's going to be one of those weaknesses for cheaper cameras in general and cheaper lenses specifically, is if you don't have adequate lighting or good lighting, it's not going to be pleasant for anybody.
Yeah. And that'll change from wedding to wedding too. So that's a huge one.
Mm-hmm.
There, so.
Yeah.
Or night versus day,
Yep.
Time of year as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. And then there's audio, which
complicated.
Yeah. And I think to me, audio can be more important than the visual look of your wedding, because if you have a really echoey room or a really, distant sounding microphone, it's going to be really hard to hear the clarity of the pastor or whomever's officiating, the bride and groom's vows, and all of those different elements. Like, it starts to get muddied if you don't have a decent microphone system. And that might be something you already have supported, like in your space, or that might be something brand new that you don't have set up yet. So that's definitely something to consider. And just like cameras, each one of these topics can be a rabbit hole of different things to consider adding. And there's tripods. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we almost could do like a series on live stream enabling your venue, whether that's setting it up and making sure that your Wi-Fi is strong enough and kind of talking about that. Maybe that's something we should consider. If you think so, you're watching on YouTube, hit us up in the comments for that. But if, like, when we air this and you're looking at it on Instagram, let us know, because if that's an issue of interest for all of you who are listening, we'd love to cover that more. I know we can have Noah back on, hopefully, where we can delve into some of this a little bit deeper. And it sounds like with this list that you have, it's pretty comprehensive.
Absolutely, yeah. And then there's tripods itself, which support the cameras. Yep. And so if you have somebody in the back of the room operating that camera, you don't want a photography camera. You want something with a little more substance. The analogy I like to use is an empty bottle versus a full water bottle, right? When it's empty, it's really easy to shake and move. But when it's full, you get a little bit of stabilization that's built into that tripod, which is helpful. We talked about the camera. And then, so all of your cameras and your audio go into a switcher, a video switcher. And so I think I still have this set up. Oh yeah. All right. Too many buttons. Here we go. So now I'm in my overhead here. And I'm going to show you, this is probably the switcher 90% of your venues need. This is called an ATEM Mini. And so this is a 4 input switcher, and I actually have one set up. I'm going to turn this camera. Sorry. It's live. What can you do? Yeah. So I have one set up right here. Which allows me to give you this overhead view, and it'll allow me to pull up another shot too. Oh, my second camera, it died. It doesn't matter. Okay. Anyway, let me go back to the first camera here. There we go. Okay.
That was really cool, though, that overhead shot, seeing all of the gear and how that, so that switcher, then what that does is that just gives you the control to switch between your different camera angles. Is that what that?
Yeah,
that's what it is?
Exactly.
Does it take audio in as well, or is it just the epicenter for the video?
No, it can do audio as well. You probably will have to convert it to a headphone jack. So it's kind of hard to see here. I was going to do an unboxing on this one eventually, but there is ports for headphones as well, or what's called an 1/8 inch jack. And so typically microphones come in as typically microphones come in as an XLR, and so you have to convert that down to an 1/8 inch to fit here. And there's some settings you need to dial in and that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, so the switcher is an important part. So the one I just showed you is a 4 input switcher, and I think it's the minimum you need. And I actually own 4 different kind of switchers, the 2 smaller ones, and then I have an 8 input switcher, and I have a 20 input switcher for the biggest shows. So it just depends on what you have. And that might sound like overkill. But the reality is, if you look at like a live sporting event, or you look at a talk show, or you look at a award show, a lot of those shows are running like 15 to 20 cameras because they got to cover all of those different angles. And I know like a typical videographer might have one or two cameras, but they're not necessarily capturing the live moment. They're creating a highlight, right? So they may not need 20 different angles and everything happening at once. So,
Cool.
Sorry, were you going to say something, Jonathan?
No, I was going to ask a question about the audio. So the audio connection, let's say you're at a venue where you already are having a DJ or something like that. I'm sure he has a mixing board, maybe an analog or digital mixing board that he's connecting all the mics to. Does that then connect up through a cable into this switcher to give you the overall full? Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So you can usually run an aux out, is what it's called, or it's a separate output from the board, which will allow you to have either the same mix that you have for the PA system, but what's even better is if you have a separate mix just for your live stream. And that will be helpful in case you need to rebalance or do different levels. Typically for a PA system, you're running, you're mixing for the room. So that's a different kind of tonality and levels that you're kind of balanced to. Whereas online, you want it to be as loud as possible without clipping or distorting. And so obviously you don't necessarily want to do that in the room because there's a threshold and there's people that are listening. So, but for your online audience, that's one of my pet peeves is you go from one live stream to another and the levels are completely different. It's because one person knows how to dial in those settings and the next person doesn't. So
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're on the workflow.
I have like 4 or 5 things here. Do you want me to keep going through or do you want to ask other questions?
Well, I think it's getting to the point where, this is becoming, like Jonathan said, a little more robust, which I think is super important.
Sure.
And, kind of going over at a very high level detail of what is included. Some of the equipment, you said cameras and tripods and the soundboards or the switchers, I'm sorry. And then I'm sure there's some audio recording equipment that you would need. To me, and from my perspective, this is a lot of education that would go into learning and understanding this equipment. So even at this point, with what you kind of put out there, do you recommend having someone professional like you come and install it? Is it something that a venue can actually take over? Are they going to have to hire 3 people to manage this? What kind of, not to take away from, the rest of the checklist, but do you feel like what's more important to kind of discuss? Because I don't want to take up all day of your time.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a huge question for sure. Yeah. So I guess it would be, you definitely need somebody to spearhead that. So whether it's you, the person listening now, or somebody from your team that has some sort of photography or video background, right? So you're handing them those responsibilities. But one of the things that I would love to work on or work with venues on it is developing that team, but also consulting. So I also offer venue consulting, and the first one I did was with a company called Base Boss. And so they had me come in and evaluate their system. We, spent several hours talking through what their goals were and what they wanted for their setup, essentially. And so I basically made them a 3-page write-up of this is exactly what you need based off of your goals. And this will be your budget of what I think you could spend on that to make it work. And so with that kind of setup, it's super helpful because you're leveraging my experience and not having to go in the weeds.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's like, I could talk about this stuff all day because I do this all the time. But like for someone who you might be like, oh, wow, none of this makes sense. Or you might be the opposite of like, oh yeah, this is nothing. Keep going. So it just depends on your personality and the amount of time you have and the dedication you have to learning this kind of stuff. Or if you're like, you know what, I'm just going to hire somebody to take care of it and then set us up well and we'll be better off that way. It's flexible.
Well, it sounds like a huge value add. And I think it's something to definitely consider as a venue. And I think if you have a system or a way of doing consultations remotely, I don't know if that's a possibility, but definitely we want to link to that because, we're talking to venue owners across the nation. So obviously they're not going to be able to afford to fly you here and there and there and there. But
Sure.
I think if there's an interest, which we highly recommend at least doing a little bit of digging, because right now, hopefully you have unfortunately, you probably have some time. But I think this is something to strongly consider because the value that I personally see to be able to provide this to your clients is a pretty good upsell. You're talking $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 to add to it. And then your overhead, once you get the equipment taken care of, should be, free essentially. The only thing you're going to be paying for per use would be the staff, the operations, or any equipment that you need to rent or borrow at that point. So I feel like the margins would be pretty good on a feature like this.
Okay. I was going to say there will be a little bit of a learning curve, like to get the gear set up and get everything up and running. But I think you can equivalent that to like having a brand new server or a brand new coordinator or what have you. Like it takes a few reps to get your system going, but once you're in the groove of it, it makes sense and it all comes together. So it's just getting to that point that you're in the groove. So
totally. Well, and I was going to say another thing, going back to this, like diversifying the revenue that you're able to bring in and diversifying the opportunities that you have. I think we're at a point now where we can think really, really creatively about how we're utilizing our spaces, even as other vendors, whether you're a florist, photographer, DJ, any of these vendor categories in the wedding and events world, you might have this time on your hands. You could move into doing these virtual events, which there's a whole market for these virtual events with speakers and different, motivational folks, as well as people who have products and services that they're able to sell remotely. But the interesting thing, I think, is when you are willing to learn some of this new technology, it's not like it's going away. When you're willing to take a little bit of extra time to learn this, you can now become a leader. And you may not be a leader in the field of technology, right? You may not be, Tim, for example, maybe, you wouldn't be running a bunch of live streams and things like that, but
I got a long ways to go before I catch up to Noah's knowledge. Yeah, so.
well, see, it's great because even if you have some of Noah's knowledge or you're willing to educate yourself a little bit, all of a sudden you can start hosting virtual meetings with other vendors in your space, talking about what's worked for them. So in a different sort of sense, you can become an industry leader simply leveraging some of these pieces of tech without having to go way too crazy down the rabbit trail of becoming a technology expert or a camera or video expert. So I think I'm echoing what you both are saying and maybe even encouraging it a bit more. I would definitely recommend any vendor who's out there listening. This corner of what you do. I think it's going to be more and more essential, whether it's for touring people, talking about your packages, interfacing with your community as a vendor. I think it's super, super important, and people will tell the difference. You can tell the difference between someone who's looking into a professional web camera, even if it's just a web camera, and you know how to operate Zoom and you know how to make sure your background looks good and things like that, and have good audio, versus someone who's kind of like, their head's cut off and they, you can't see anything and like,
their nose
exactly. And those are maybe some of the basics, but that's really where it starts. And that, I think, begins your journey. So, well, I totally love it.
I totally agree. And not to transition too far, but I have two questions. It's a two-part question. So first, Noah, what percentage or do you think this is super relevant to weddings right now, or is it still relevant to corporate more so? What's your, I guess, gut feeling on that?
I love this question. I think the world is going to change. And I think this is going to affect the live events industry as a whole. I think concerts are going to be different. I think sporting events are going to be different. I think the world is going to be different after COVID. And whether that's an incremental change, like we're 10% different, or maybe we're 60% different, like I think that it's going to be substantial either way. And so, I wouldn't be doubling down in streaming if I didn't think it would be something that's worthwhile in the future. But I think we're also kind of at its infancy stages, to be honest, because I think the technology hasn't really been as accessible and as affordable as it's been, and hopefully it's only going to get better from there. So yeah, I'm excited for the future of live streaming, and I think it should be a core part of a lot of people's businesses. So.
Well, Noah, even just something like the little device that you just showed us, the ATEM Mini, that switcher, was something like that even available for the consumer or prosumer market 2 years ago?
No, yeah, and there are a few companies that are just disrupting the industry, right? And Blackmagic's definitely one of them. And I have tens of thousands of dollars worth of Blackmagic gear because their price point and what they offer for their equipment is at about 10% of what other companies were offering before. I remember the first video switcher that I learned how to use, it was called a TriCaster. And that was easily like a $30,000+ switcher. And that was just like an 8-input switcher. And so now today, I own an 8-input 4K switcher, and it was $3,000. So that's pretty incredible.
Wow.
But the icing on the cake here, this switcher here is $300,
Wow.
and it's 1080p, but it's pretty freaking incredible how affordable this kind of stuff is. And obviously, this is not the only piece of tech you need to run a full stream. There's going to be other things, but to go from $30,000 to like $3,000 over a 15 or 20 year span is pretty incredible. And so that's why I harp on the thought of like, there are tools and resources out there that are more affordable than ever before. So why not consider that to be a part of your package? And then if you're like me, if you think big long-term and big picture type stuff, like it only makes sense if this is going to make you money in the long term. Yeah. Why not invest in it?
Well, and that goes into the second one. I mean, this is obviously an investment, and that's how you have to look at it. As every revenue stream, it should be considered an investment. There's upside, downside risks, there's profit, there's loss, there's expenses and income all generated from it. So it is a business decision when you go this route, but it's awesome to hear that the barrier to entry from a cost standpoint has dropped significantly. And now that there's resources like you out there, and people that are willing to help and enable you, the barrier to entry from a knowledge perspective has dropped significantly. So every day it seems to be getting easier and easier to consider these alternative revenue streams, which I think is fantastic. And this actually leads into the second part of my question. It opens up the opportunity for you to increase your occupancy through corporate weddings and like these live events and the small concerts, because a lot of corporate companies that we were talking to a while back ago at our venues, they wanted features like this. They needed features like this. And when you look at companies like Amazon, who aren't even going to consider having events until June or September of next year, like if you have this opportunity, like there's no reason for you to exclude us through the first half of 2021. You can still have your event be spatially or socially distanced, everybody wear a mask, but still hit the majority of your audience that you were targeting. And your venue would be one of the few that could be able to do this. So at that point, I'm not a huge proponent of saying, diversify all of your weddings versus corporate versus mitzvahs versus everything. But at this point right now, you have to consider those options. And if this gives you a leg up on the competition, if this gives you an avenue to consider, or at least to speed up that income, I would strongly advise that you consider something like this. And I think the document you're going to release that we can share on our YouTube and our comment section is going to be a huge advantage for people to consider, and at least say, all right, for what is it, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, whatever that ends up being, if that's a small investment but it gets you 3 events or 6 events, like now you're starting to see a return much quicker. It's not just your upsell to your wedding or your bride for $1,000. You're having an entirely new event on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which you likely have some availability if you're focused on a wedding venue. So
well, and Tim, this is something that you and I have talked about, but no, I think it perfectly builds into your skill set here and what you just said about the world changing. I think that when you think about people getting outside of these corporate structures, literally structures like buildings, maybe out of meeting rooms, people working from home, that's been a trend that's consistently happened. I think that, now with COVID, that's hyper accelerated this. I would not be surprised if you saw large corporations moving from large mega campus models, even something like an Apple headquarters or a Google headquarters, where it's just this mega complex where you have all these people there, which actually does then have a ripple effect on the housing prices in the area, on transportation, on the amount that you have to pay your employees to get to and from work. I mean, it may be, depending on your position at any one of these companies, you might have to live an hour or an hour and a half away and be having that commute all the time. And so I think as companies start thinking more about their employee health, and then with everything happening with COVID and local and statewide restrictions for gathering people together, having a virtually enabled space actually could lend you to being one of the little satellites that might start popping up. Because instead of at one big campus, you might have 10 different satellite campuses that might be all in a 100-mile radius, but those are going to be there because they're only individually taking 20, 30 people instead of having 1,000 people come in at one time. So I think the conclusion we're coming to here is that as a venue, you better think very seriously about virtually enabling your space, because this is something that's definitely not going away and could be a huge, huge benefit to your space as a way to make other revenue and just open yourself up to other opportunities. Was that too far? Did I go too far there? Because we started off saying it's, kind of, sort of, maybe half and half.
Well, I think we talked ourselves into it, but
I think we did.
I mean, obviously that's why we had Noah on is to give us some clarity on, what it is and is it a possible, opportunity for us to consider.
Yep.
And I'm sold. I'd like to, take a look at what you've got coming across the desk of everybody. And okay, well, $15,000, this obviously, like we all agree, is going to be, if it's not you, it's going to be the next venue. And I think with all the barriers to entry, dropping significantly, I'm just wondering if there's going to be a whole new vendor category that gets established. Next to your DJ is going to be your live streaming artists, and they're the ones that bring 6 cameras and everything else. Like you basically have created a new, vendor. And that's where, I think, Noah, you've got lots of opportunity in front of you to at least consider, like, hey, I could just be the wedding vendor guy that does all of these live streaming events because I've got the gear. And so, your target audience may not just be venues. It could actually be couples and brides and grooms. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for, if you're an entrepreneur out there and you're listening right now, this could be a very viable path because as a photographer, the most expensive part was buying the camera and the gear. And then once you got that done, everything's just gravy on top of it. Same thing with the venues. Once you get the space, everything is kind of just gravy when you book the space out. And so I think this is an awesome opportunity for a lot of people to consider. And with these resources available, it totally makes sense. So
what do you think about that, Noah, with the other category? Because I saw you kind of like almost smiling, and I felt like you that this. I mean, this.
Did I burst the bubble? Did I ruin it for you?
Your passion.
No, I love it. No, actually, it brought up a little bit of a frustration for me. I connected with. I'll throw them under the bus. I don't care. The Wedding Wire, right at the Knot.
Okay.
I got on a call with them, and I basically was like, "Hey, you guys don't really have a category for this. Why not?" And their answer was essentially, this is who we are. This is who we've been for 15 years, and we don't need to change. And to me,
that's a terrible reason.
Yeah.
I like hearing that.
Obviously it was said differently, but to me, that was just like, it infuriated me enough to want to do something about it. So it just stoked the fire in me of like, all right, I'm in the right spot. Even though this huge resource for a lot of wedding planners, bride and grooms, what have you, even though they don't see it as a viable thing yet, I'm ahead of the curve still.
Yep.
And if you look at that historically, if you look at the Apples of the world, the Googles, the Teslas, to me, they're ahead of the curve. And I think in some ways, even though COVID's forcing us faster to get to that point, we're still a little bit ahead of the curve. I don't think it's quite mainstream to be streaming weddings yet in 2020. Yeah. That might be different in 2021 or 2022, but right now I do feel like I have a huge edge. But not only that, I've been doing this for 15 years. Not only that, I have $125,000 worth of gear, so like, not only that, I have the right attitude, I think, than compared to a lot of other people who are burnt out. So I feel like I'm in a really good position right now to do my best and to stride and be excited. And it's kind of funny because my wife was teasing me because I turned 30 a few days ago, like I said earlier. But to me, I'm like, I'm so excited for my 30s because I feel like I said, I could leverage my knowledge, but also I have I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for what's next. So
totally.
Yeah.
You're not jaded like Tim.
No.
Yeah.
No, I'm so jaded.
I
don't even know what I'm
promise
doing
when
this
you
podcast.
I promised I wouldn't make him cry. He made me promise.
You're trying hard though, man. You just keep throwing the jabs.
How did that make you feel? No.
well, that's another episode. We'll talk about that later. I really appreciate you. I don't want to take up any more time. Where are we at, Jonathan? Do you have more questions?
We have a couple more questions left. It's time for the lightning round. I think I decided to say fire round in the beginning, and I switched it to lightning round midstream. But midstream, get that? Dad jokes.
Boom.
Anyways, that was awkward. I want to ask you, Noah, a couple of questions that we like to ask a variety of these for every different guest, but I want to ask you some personal questions, just things that inspire you and maybe some different resources that our listeners could take value from as well. And so I want to start off with a couple of these. These are just kind of short response type things. But I'm excited to hear these specifically from you because I know you said you just started thinking more entrepreneurially? You kind of started thinking, you said blue collar to white collar, if you can handle that analogy. I kind of thought that was cool and funny how you phrase that. So the entrepreneur journey is so incredible because there are these hurdles and there's all this excitement and anticipation, but at the same time, there's these, letdowns, and just, it's dramatic. It's rewarding. You're never paid enough. Then you're paid so much. Like, it's all over the place. And so I wanted to ask you, since becoming an entrepreneur and your shift from working for someone on any of these different gigs that you've worked on, and we had a chance to chat, I think you're being really humble, with some of the things that I know you've worked on, but even fast forwarding to now when you're an entrepreneur and you're working for yourself, what was the biggest mindset shift? And this is question number one here. What's the biggest mindset shift that you've experienced going from employee to entrepreneur?
Oh man, I love this question. So many good questions today. Okay, let's dive in here. For me, it was going from realizing as a camera person, someone who loves technology and loves what I do, I realized something clicked in me that I'm labor for somebody else. And so the shift of working for an hourly wage or a daily wage or what have you, going from that to I'm making a percentage, or I'm making per project, or I'm making a value-based pricing setup, right? All of those shifts are huge. And I think that really opened up my mind and my perspective on almost like a better way of living. I hate to say it that way, but it's true.
Totally.
I think I had a really different perspective on that. And I think that shift was the biggest shift. And then for me personally, there's a little bit of psychology going on in the sense of I want to make sure that I'm always learning and growing and expanding myself, right? And so I think that comes with me overcoming the hurdle of one of my weaknesses was reading. I wasn't a big reader growing up, and so I finally caught on to Audible. And that's what I was doing a moment ago, is pulling up my book list of books that I've been listening to, because I think that was another mind expansion kind of moment of the last year I've read more books than I have in my whole life, because I've Audible and I'm listening to stuff all the time, and I'm trying to do those things. So
Cool.
yeah, those have been the biggest shifts. So
amazing. Tim, do you have one, or do you want me to fire away?
No, you go, dude. I like it. You're asking great questions today, Jonathan. So keep going.
Thank you. They're either great or they're horrible. So either
your favorite color, we're not really concerned about that. So don't ask that.
The next question is, who has inspired you the most in the business world? Is there an entrepreneur that you look up to? Is it kind of a public figure, someone you take a lot of inspiration from?
Oh, definitely. So there are people who I've worked with directly that I always look up to, especially in the film business. So names you wouldn't know, but Rich Schaefer is a friend of mine, a really good friend of mine. Tom DeNovi, those are both people I've worked with in the past. Michael Miller. But the more famous people you've probably heard of course, there's Elon Musk.
Okay.
And I'm a huge.
What about Elon? I'm sorry to interrupt. What is it about Elon Musk that
That's a great question. That is a great question, Tim.
Oh man, so intellectually he's on a different level, obviously, but he's able to balance is the wrong word, but he's able to multiply things in his life, his knowledge, but also business sense, his engineering sense, and he's able to leverage multiple things to be unique and to be somebody that is very special, essentially. And so obviously he has Tesla, and that product line with the cars is a pivotal change, to technology and the industry as a whole. And so I don't know if anybody's following this, but to me, I think Tesla is going to start to dominate the car market. And I would be surprised if let me rephrase this. I would be surprised if we didn't see multiple traditional automakers shut down in the next 3 to 5 years because of Tesla. So,
ooh, that's a strong political statement there. You're making a lot of people unhappy there.
Yeah.
No, but I agree. And I mean, that's the one thing that we're all seeing right now is the world is shifting. And, I understand that industries are going to die, but new industries are going to be born. So it kind of forces people out of their comfort zone and to learn. And that's where I think the entrepreneurial spirit that you've got and so many others is really going to drive the future of our economy. So I thank you. Thank you for answering that. I agree with your analysis and assessment. So.
And it's a really scary thing. Sorry to piggyback on that, but it's a scary thing to see change and see that the different world's coming. And I think we kind of are challenged in that moment of, do we go back to our old ways and just fold and do what we've always done? Or do we stop for a second, swallow our pride and realize we need to do something different, you know? And I think that's a huge pivotal moment for us.
Boom. That is a soundbite right there. We're at an hour and 13 minutes. We're at about an hour. I'm taking that. That is going in the front, because I think that really sums up what we're talking about here. You know, taking on something like virtually enabling your space. I think venues, in a lot of cases, are lazy. You know, and if you're a venue owner right now out there and you're listening and you hate me for saying that, that's fine. You know, send me a DM. I'm cool with that.
Jonathan likes to make people cry. So congratulations. Welcome to the club.
No, actually, I'm a super nice guy. It's going to be so funny. Anyone who knows me, they're going to be like, man, this is a different side of him. But no, I really think that venues can be very lazy because they know that they're often the first one considered. And you know that you're going to get the booking because you're the first one. And so you can afford to have subpar customer service. You can afford to be a little bit archaic in your systems because you know that you're needed. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And if you've got a nice space, if you've got a big tree, if you've got a nice wall, you know, whatever it is, if your location is good, oftentimes that's the driving force in the booking. And so you don't have to be excellent, you know, but I think that we're asking our listeners to kind of be comfortable being uncomfortable, pushing themselves, being able to look at this new way that people are experiencing events and possibly shift and calibrate their spaces to be able to accommodate that. So I absolutely love that you said that. All right, Noah, final question. I think we would be remiss if we didn't ask you what your favorite movie was.
Ooh. All right.
We have to, because I mean, you're a cinematographer. We have to ask that.
Sure. So it was one that wasn't a critically acclaimed, if I'm saying that right. Hook. It's 1994, I want to say.
Okay.
With Robin Williams.
Yeah.
Steven Spielberg director. Yeah.
Yep.
So it was one that kind of flew under the radar, but for me, the childhood fantasy of going off to Neverland, or like being a part of a big sword fight, or you know, experiencing a whole different world, that was exciting and fun for me. And I'm a huge Robin Williams fan. I got to meet his daughter, actually got to work with her on a feature film. Robin Williams movies as a whole, but Hook, I guess, is my go-to, even though I like to tell people I don't have one favorite one. I like so many movies. So
close.
That's awesome.
Close second. Ooh, man, that's just my excuse to not have a number one pick. It's okay. So, man, you know what's funny about movies for me though? I'm going to slide around the question here. I'll watch a movie and then like 3 to 5 weeks later, I'll forget like a lot of the things in the movie. So I'll have to like go back and rewatch stuff. Or, you know, my wife and my brother are both really good about remembering stuff, and I'm really good about forgetting stuff. So
nice.
Less with the short-term memory. Me too.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
That makes 3 of us. All right. Well, Noah, I so appreciate you coming on, spending some time with us, sharing your valuable insight. I think so many people also, just another point to your credit, so many people with a specific skill set can be, I think, very selfish in not wanting to share the knowledge that they have. And I think you see that across artists. I think you see that across, I was talking to a drummer the other day about this, and a guitarist, and he was saying, you know, how guitar guys are a little bit weird because they don't want to share their riffs or whatever. Drummers, he's found, are a little bit more friendly. They'll show different beats or different things. And I think that you see that a lot in the wedding and event industry. I think that you see, even though there's plenty of, what's it called? Collaboration over competition. And that's kind of a buzzword and a phrase. But I also think there's a lot of really toxic competition that happens among different vendor categories. And it's so refreshing to see someone who is not only young and accomplished, but someone who is willing to share the knowledge and the experience you have. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with us and our listeners. Where can people find you? You know, if someone's listening to this and they kind of want to follow up and maybe learn more about your company, maybe even have you out to consult, where are they reaching out to you at?
Yeah, so you can go to corporatestreams.com. So the front-facing page is business-oriented, but if you do /weddings, you can kind of look at the wedding-specific stuff as well. You could always email me at noah@corporatestreams.com. But if you want to see some great resources, we have a blog page on corporatestreams.com, and then our YouTube channel, Corporate Streams. You can find a video playlist that at this recording wasn't set up yet, but hopefully in the future, this will be good pressure for me to finish the series. But I'll have a playlist up that goes through those 12 different things that you need to live stream. And so we'll have like an overview, and then we'll have like deeper dives into each one of those things, which will be a great free resource for anybody who wants to learn about that. But yeah, feel free to reach out. I'd love to come out to your venues, or at least consult virtually and talk to you about what the possibilities are for that. And then hopefully, at some point too, if you have a bigger or higher end client where you want a full support of a full crew, I'd love to come out and do that as well.
Well, we're going to definitely work together at some point. And Tim and I, we've been tossing around all sorts of ideas. We've got some really cool things brewing, and I think as we find really incredible people that we can put together on a team, I think going into some of these spaces and helping venue owners just have better spaces and book more weddings. And I think across the vendor category, that's something we're looking for. So Tim, any final words?
No, just a huge thank you, Noah. I really appreciate your time. And I'll be honest, when I came into this, I was like, I don't know, this is going to be techie. And, I know Jonathan. So, but no, you made it very simplified. And honestly, you convinced me that this is something that venues should very strongly consider, as well as the industry as a whole. So I appreciate you.
So, next
thanks for
time,
having me. Yeah,
next time we do this podcast, Tim, he's going to have a switcher. He's going to have like 3 camera angles.
Dude, I just got my first webcam. Don't get me started on switchers.
He just did
I was that tech unenabled guy.
I love it. Well, thank you to our listeners, to our viewers. I really appreciate it. We would love if you went and followed us on Instagram. It's The Venue RX. We also have a website that is not yet live, but we are very excited about it, and we will let you know. We eventually are looking forward to having sponsors as well. And I really think this is a great space to shout out your business. And so we will have those sponsorship spots available as well. But for now, go to our YouTube channel. It's The Venue RX, Instagram, The Venue RX. Check out Noah at Corporate Streams and follow us, like us. Tell us how we're messing up. We love the criticism. We love the input and feedback, and we can't wait to see you all in the next episode.